Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be recapping the group stage of Six Invitational 2025 for Rainbow Six Siege. I think I'll leave the prediction talk to another video. Maybe I'll allude to it a little bit in this one, but we'll cover what happened in my predictions and also upcoming predictions in the future, because you can't yet make any predictions for the bracket portion. That's locked to the final 10 matches, which when we get there, I got some bad news for people if you haven't logged into the website yet. Unless you did really, really well in groups, I think you're in for a rude awakening as far as what is possible in terms of obtaining. But again, we'll leave that for the future. We're just going to talk about the groups here, and then we'll take a quick look at the upcoming bracket, how that might pan out, and then maybe at the end I'll also take a quick look at how my fantasy draft went. So starting in Group A, I don't want to just go over every single match, so I'll put them on the screen here. You can take a quick look if you don't remember what happened or you didn't see what happened. But here are all the results in terms of the maps and who won. But yeah, let's just talk about the group trends overall. So G2, by the numbers, the best team from the entire group stage, not just this one. They went flawless in terms of both matches and maps. They had a 2.0 win-loss on round, so really, really great stuff. They were definitely an underrated team, and G2 just seems like time and time again are an underrated team, and then they usually make a pretty deep run. I think that wasn't true at the last two events. I think people had probably higher expectations, certainly in Manchester. I guess Montreal a little bit more up for interpretation. But they were probably the best team in Phase 1, and then they went 0-3 in Phase 2. And I think that led to a lot of people underrating them here at this event. And this is actually the second year in a row that they went completely flawless in groups. They have not lost, this organization, and I guess also Alamau and Doki have not lost a Six Invitational groups map since the year 2023, so kind of funny there. Anyways, they dominated the group. Good for them. They're moving on. They got a bye in the first round. M80, this is about where I predicted them, and this is a team I still have decent hopes for. I don't know that I necessarily bet on them making a deep run. It's possible. Like, this is probably the best we've seen from M80 ever. Certainly better than last year, where they ended up last place in their group and eliminated. So 6-3, winning 2/3 of their map is really solid. Second place in their group. They actually were the best performing second place team. So a little bit of spoilers, but I'll just show you this here. Only 10 points for FaZe Clan, only 10 points for Raza, and W7M also at 11 points, but they had a worse map win percentage and a worse round win percentage, so I don't know which one of them was the tiebreaker, but I assume it's one of those two, because they actually had the exact same round differential as well. That led to M80 getting the first pick, and they showed a content piece that they posted where they just spun a wheel and picked the team to play against based on that, and they picked Dark Zero. So I don't know if they like retroactively set that up based on what they wanted, or if that's actually what they did. You might as well flip a coin, but I think probably Dark Zero is the one you'd want to play the most out of those three. I think SSG and Shopify are a little bit scarier. Unwanted, they were, I mean, certainly better, maybe a little bit better than I expected, but honestly, this is probably about where I expected them. I think just Liquid massively underperformed, and Joel somewhat underperformed relative to what I expected. So again, this is about where I thought they would be skill-wise, but the other teams were just not as good as I thought. Unwanted, they looked decent. They went 4-5 at the end of the day, and it looked like maybe they were even going to get the win on M80. They had a lead here on Clubhouse. They were up like 4-0 or something, and then they lost a bunch of rounds. They don't end up winning either map. They don't push overtime in either, so a little bit sad to again get off to that big advantage and then come back on and not go to a third map, not go to overtime, not any of that, when I thought this was going to be one of the best matches of the group stage, and in a sense it was in terms of the banter and whatnot. But yeah, it did end a little bit short for what I would have liked and what most people would have liked. But still, they get to go into the upper bracket. They have all of their lives intact. Team Liquid, yeah, like I said, probably the biggest underperformer, expectations versus reality. They went 1-3. They only beat Joel, who is arguably the worst team in the event. So yeah, Team Joel just kind of going out sad. Liquid, probably they'll go out sad. Maybe they'll make a deep lower bracket run, but they're not really a team known for their mental resolve. So it seems like probably going straight into that lower bracket might be a bit of a chalker. I guess maybe if they can get some weaker opponents early on, and we'll see who actually ends up playing them, because we don't know for sure until we see who loses in the upper bracket. But yeah, I guess it's possible, but I don't know. I'm not having the highest hopes of Liquid going forward. Okay, moving on to Group B. Let's show the matches here as well if you want to take a quick look. This was presumed the group of death, and I think that did pan out, and the team that died was not Cyclops like people expected. Cyclops, they were a lot better than anybody expected, and I guess they were the best APAC team at this event because they were the only one that did not get grouped. Instead, they end up grouping Team Secret. It came down to the very final day at the very least. Secret had to win this 2-0. As soon as Cyclops won a map, Secret was eliminated, and Secret did win the first map, but then they lost the second, so they had to play a third map where they were already eliminated from the tournament. So probably Skyscraper would have been more competitive if Secret actually was still, alive in the event, but they were not. So I think they sort of played and were ready to call it quits. Furia ending up on top. I don't think too many people expected it. If you didn't look at anything that happened since the last SI, this might be the exact predictions you made. Furia end up on top. It did not look like it was going to happen because they took a 2-0 loss to Cyclops in their very first match, but then they beat FaZe, they beat Shopify, they beat Secret. So really impressive wins. And then the one puzzling loss, there has been some talk about how, oh my god, Cyclops finally made it out of groups, but they made it out of phase 1 in Manchester. So I guess if you just don't count that, then it's true. Because they made it out of phase 1 into the top 16 of that event. They just did the same thing here. They made it out of groups and they now qualify for top 16. I guess it's certainly more impressive to make it out of groups at SI than making it out of phase 1 at a major. A bunch of teams auto qualify for phase 2 of majors, but still, I think that's just technically not true. They have made it out of one group stage before. Yeah, Cyclops were maybe one of the biggest overperformers, only in terms of one position, but like almost everybody that saw this group thought that they were a lock to get eliminated, and not only did they get one win, they got two. And yeah, Furia, sort of back to them, I got sidetracked on Cyclops. I think a lot of people thought that they were going to be like second, third, fourth. I think FaZe was really the team most people expected to be in first place, and I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation considering the year that we saw from them versus the year that we saw from Furia. Furia still looking like one of the better teams in the world, but they missed out on Montreal in general. They have pretty reasonable placements at both Esports World Cup and Manchester, however, and maybe returning to the Six Invitational, they're ready to make it a back-to-back and get back to work. They went 6-2. They were the second best team in all of the groups, after G2. Certainly better than BDS's 10 points and similar to Virtus Pro, but all three of Furia's wins came in 2 maps. And then FaZe, yeah, they just lost to Furia on the last day. FaZe, if I remember right, generally has a pretty good record over Furia. Obviously, they choked the grand final last year against them, and they just lost to them here. But I think more times than not, they tend to beat them, especially when they play in Brazil. Yeah, I guess just when the lights are brightest, Handy cannot defeat Nade. And so they end up in second, which is still pretty reasonable. Then Shopify here in third. I think they're happy enough. They beat Cyclops and Team Secret, the 2 teams below them. They lost to Furia and FaZe, the 2 teams above them. And so they lost to both Brazilian teams. But I think these are the 2 Brazilian teams that you can't feel that bad about losing to because, again, the 2 grand finalists from last year. So I have decent hope for Shopify. We need to see them have the ability to defeat the absolute top teams if they are going to make a really deep run. Because again, it's great if you can beat Cyclops and Secret, but if you just can't beat Furia and FaZe, like I don't see how you can make a grand final or a top 4. I think they have it in them. If you were watching this one, Canadian said some funny words going into round 15. And then they lost round 15 and then 7 rounds in a row. So maybe the worst call of all time, the stuff he was saying to lose 8 rounds in a row. But at least they were very competitive on Chalet. Maybe if they won Chalet, Cafe might have been closer. I don't think they were completely chalked. I think they just got outplayed. They got like mega clutched on 1v3 by JV in the first round of Cafe. So they probably should have at least got the 1 round. But the 7-0 is embarrassing. At least they ran all the way up to round 15 though on Chalet. And in their match up against FaZe, where is it? Very first matchup. This was pretty close, 3-7-5, so they got a close win and they got 2 close losses. So at least they were able to run it close against FaZe. And this is especially good because FaZe just crushed them in the top 8 of Montreal. That's where they played. That's where they were Sonics at the time, but they got eliminated. So at least it was a lot closer of a loss. That's a good trajectory, but again, we're going to need to see a little bit more from these guys. And finally, yeah, Team Secret, they got 1 map up against Cyclops, and they got 1 map up against Shopify. But yeah, they got 2-0'd by both FaZe and Furia. And again, if you couldn't 2-0 Cyclops, I guess you deserve to go home at that point. I feel like it would look a lot more surprising to see Furia or FaZe or even Shopify going home rather than them. But again, getting eliminated when Cyclops in your group is a little bit of a bad look. I mean, I guess Cyclops is a somewhat reasonable team, but they've been grouped so many times that them not getting grouped does look a little bit strange. Okay, moving on to Group C. BDS do end up topping the group, but it is very, very close. They tie Raza in terms of points, in terms of maps won. They even have a worse round differential, but I think the the main tiebreaker is head-to-head, and BDS did beat Raza Company. So although Raza Company had the better stats by a pretty slim margin, BDS did beat Raza Company, so they end up above them. And before I get too deep here, let me show you the matches in case you aren't aware. Yeah, Talon beat BDS once again. So that is a 2-0 record, and several of the players changed since Talon beat BDS last time, but they still do have Fabian, so I guess Fabian just holds the BDS leash or whatever. Yeah, BDS does end up on top as expected, but it was much closer. Again, like I said, they basically tied with Raza Company, and they took a loss to Dark Zero in 3 maps. They took a loss to Talon in 3 maps, and so BDS looking a lot more mortal. To be fair, in Montreal, one of the 2 majors where they made it to the grand final and lost, where they placed second, they had a pretty rough Swiss stage, losing to Talon. They lost to, I think, Furia, which is a fine loss to have, I suppose, but they almost lost to Cyclops as well, being eliminated. They didn't quite, so they had a little bit of a rough going there, but then made it all the way to the grand final. So don't count out BDS just yet because they've been a little bit shaky. There's still certainly time for them to wake up. Raza Company, perhaps the biggest overperformer. I think Cyclops just not getting grouped is really impressive, but I said I would be very surprised to see Raza Company above 3rd place. I thought they were probably going to be like 4th, maybe 3rd, but 2nd place, and again, very, very close to being number 1 in the group. They've got to be like the biggest overperformers. These guys, or at least 3 of them, were in Montreal. They qualified directly for phase number 2 by being the 2nd seed out of Brazil. Very impressive, but then they go 0-3, so don't really do anything internationally. I wonder if that was enough international experience to make a difference here, or if they're just a solid enough team. If they upgraded their 2 players heavily enough, I'll be curious to see more from these guys going forward, because again, probably the biggest overperformers in all of the groups. And then Dark Zero, they were a weird one. I feel like a lot of the iterations of Dark Zero have been teams that very rarely lose to bad or teams that are worse than them, but also had sort of a hard cap where they couldn't beat the absolute top teams. But Dark Zero, they just beat BDS, but they also lost to Talon, and they lost to Raza, right? And I guess Raza's looking pretty good, but they beat Falcons and BDS, and they lost to Talon and Raza, so sort of a weird spread. We'll see what they do going forward. They look pretty inconsistent, and I don't know what else to say for them. I think they could maybe make a deep run. We'll have to see how the group results sort of translate into bracket, but they're a bit of a wild card in my mind at this point. And then Falcons, yeah, sort of a rough go. They went 1-3. Their only win came up against Talon on the very first day. Well, this is obviously very important in the end. If Talon had taken 1 map off of Falcons, it would have been them advancing instead of Falcons. And they had the exact same number of points. They had the exact same round differential, exact same everything, basically. They played the exact same number of rounds even, but because Falcons had the head-to-head win over Talon, it was Falcons advancing. They don't look nearly as good as they did at the last major, and this has happened more than once. This is not the first time where we saw a team from the MENA region doing really well at one event and then not living up to it at the next event. I think this isn't as extreme of a drop-off as we saw in the past from Falcons or GK, but we'll have to see. If they just get eliminated right away in bracket, then what was the point? So let's move on to Group D. Okay, so these are the results here, and this group ended up being pretty competitive. As I said before, there is one team in this group that got 0 points, got 0 maps, so Scars got pretty heavily crushed. I guess let me know if you think Scars were worse or you think that Team Joel were worse. But the rest of the group, yeah, pretty tight. 12 points, 11 points, 9 points, 8 points, and Oxygen, yeah, really competitive. Some people thought that it would even be Oxygen being eliminated over Scars, but a whole 8-point gap between the 2 teams emerges by the end. Oxygen even went positive on round differential, and a big part of that might have been their game against Scars. That game actually looked a little bit scary. Diaz he got a 1v5 clutch on border, and I think he also got he had like a 1v1 clutch or something in the very last round. He just stayed alive on time. So had he lost those 2 rounds, it could have been a 5-5, and then who knows what would have happened from there. But yeah, they get it done fairly cleanly in terms of the round numbers, but there were a lot of very messy rounds if you actually watch that game. So I don't have the highest hopes for Oxygen going forward, but I am glad to see them making it out of group. I would have been quite sad to see Oxygen be eliminated instead of Scars. So Virtus Pro, W7M, Space Station end up as the top 3 teams. I had these 2 swapped, so actually I was very close to predicting this group in its entirety, but unfortunately the way the predictions work, I only get 1 point because you had to predict the exact positions of the 1st, 2nd, and 5th place teams. teams. So yeah, Virtus Pro get it done with 1 point over W7M. They lost one fewer map and, quite a bit better round differential. So Virtus Pro looking solid, and I guess a little bit surprising to not see W7M top their group, being the reigning major champions, but it's not like they didn't make it close. They only took the one loss up against Space Station. So they even beat the team that ended up above them. Space Station finally getting a win over W7M. And when we look at the bracket in just a second, you'll see that they now play against FaZe. So W7M has kind of owned them for a few games, and they got revenge. So maybe it's time that they get the revenge on FaZe as well. They usually run it really close against them, but fall short. And I think that does it for the groups. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Okay, so looking at the bracket, let me zoom out a little bit so we can see it all. This is how things lined up. So M80, they had the best stats, so they got to pick who they wanted to play against from all the third seeds. Couldn't pick Unwanted because they were in the same group, but they chose to play against Dark Zero out of them, Space Station, and Shopify. I think this was probably the best pick. And then I think W7M got the next pick, and yeah, Unwanted is pretty clearly the team you would go with. And then I think FaZe might have had the next pick, but they didn't actually get a choice because they were in the same group as Shopify, so these two were just determined not by what the teams actually wanted necessarily, but by the fact that you can't have two teams rematching from their groups immediately. So W7M versus Unwanted, this is the most lopsided looking one. Certainly W7M is the pretty heavy favorite to win here, and if they do, then it is going to be a grand final rematch from both Esports World Cup and Montreal in the second round of upper bracket. FaZe versus Space Station. This feels closer than the last one, but certainly FaZe is the favorite here. But again, Space Station, they finally defeated W7M. Maybe this is the time for them to finally defeat FaZe Clan. I think it's possible, but again, I would say FaZe is at least some amount the favorite here. Raza versus Shopify. I think if you saw this matchup just coming into the event, this would be an easy Shopify pick. But after what we saw in groups, Raza Company is a second seed, Shopify is a third seed. Shopify went 2-2, Raza Company went 3-1, and Shopify, both of their losses came against Brazilian teams. You might argue that Raza Company isn't quite FaZe Clan or Furia, but I mean, they are a Brazilian team, and it seems like that is a little bit of an issue for Shopify so far. Maybe that was just a fluke. Maybe it's a pattern. We'll have to see. I think if they do lose this one, you can probably call it a pattern, but I would still probably call Shopify the favorite by at least some margin. And then this one feels the most 50-50. This is actually a rematch of the quarterfinals of Manchester, but M80 is very different now. And even from last stage, like these guys played in the playoffs of NAL to qualify for Montreal. Dark Zero won that, and then M80 also lost to Space Station, and then they also did not make it through the LZQ. So that sort of started their string of losses that led to them not qualifying. But again, M80 with several roster changes, basically a different team. Only Kino and Spoit are retained. I guess M80 is the higher seed. They've been more consistently good. You might argue Dark Zero's group was tougher. I guess that's sort of up to interpretation. Group A versus Group C. At this point, this feels very up in the air. And then I don't want to just predict the entire thing, but if we saw W7M BDS played in both of the last two grand finals, if you count Esports World Cup, BDS won the first one, and then W7M won the second one. So whatever you think there. BDS, I guess, is the first seed. W7M is a second seed, but BDS just got there by the skin of their teeth. So this could certainly go either way. G2 versus either of them. This is a hard call because G2 dominated their group, but I don't know if they'll necessarily keep it up. I think it's possible. Virtus Pro up against, I guess I said Shopify. I would probably bet on Virtus Pro, but I could certainly see that going either way. And then Furia versus either of these guys. I think Furia certainly has the edge, but we could see maybe an upset. I think it depends what we see in this matchup. If we see one of these teams look really good, maybe I think they'll have a better chance against Furia, but just at the moment, it feels like probably Furia will win this. And then down here, Unwanted versus Falcons. That should be a good match. I guess I'd say Unwanted, but I don't know. Maybe that's just bias. Maybe that's the fact that Unwanted is a higher seed, whatever the case. Then Liquid up against FaZe or Space Station. I feel like I would take FaZe or Space Station, whoever ends up here. If we saw FaZe versus Liquid, that's sort of one of the all-time El Clasicos, but certainly I would pick FaZe or Space Station to defeat Liquid here. Raza or Shopify against Oxygen. I guess I'd pick whichever one of these guys falls down, but I will definitely be rooting for Oxygen if it's against Raza. And then finally, Cyclops versus M80 or Dark Zero. Yes, Cyclops have been impressive, but I didn't predict them to make it this far, and I'm going to continue to bet against them until they get eliminated. If they make a deep run, I mean, I guess I'll be eating my hat, but it doesn't seem super likely. And then yeah, beyond that, I don't think I'll continue to make predictions. But let's take a very quick look at the results of fantasy. Okay, so this guy ended up in first. He had Gunner, Ambi, Benja, Doki, Shaiko, G2, Chalet. G2 was the best pick for teams, so good on him there. Chalet, I think, was the second best for maps. Ambi and Doki were two of the very best picks, and then as you can see, all of his picks were pretty good. I ended up down here in 17th place, which I think is pretty good, and this weirdo completely copied my team. Don't know why you do that, doesn't seem very fun, but there were 157 people that entered, so I end up right around the top 10%. All of my picks were pretty reasonable. Newers was really good. Shaiko and Leakfact pretty good. Gaveni good, especially for the cost. Herds was underwhelming, but he was one of the cheaper picks. I had Clubhouse, one of the less good maps, but it doesn't make a huge difference. I could have got like 30 to 60 more points if I'd picked a different map. And then Furia, it was looking pretty bad when they lost to Cyclops, but then they won the next 3 in a row. Unfortunately, none of those series went to map 3 to get me even more points from Furia and or Herds. But yeah, I think I drafted fairly well. I think I placed fairly well, again, around top 10%. And let me know what you thought about the groups, what you thought were the wildest results, what you think is going to happen in the upcoming bracket. And also, if you feel like it, let me know how you did in the fantasy draft. That's going to do it for me. I will catch you guys next time.